Okay, I'm going to try something that I've never tried before, and I might do it more often. I wrote a piece on the weekend about getting along with people cross culturally. And why I wrote it was for two reasons. One, I was wrestling with something. I was wrestling with something. Was in a conversation with a friend. And in that conversation, I didn't feel like they were very curious about me. They always would give kind of their point of view in this oratory fashion, like I was being lectured. And I'm sensitive to that, but this is somebody I love. So I'm like, why does that keep happening? Are you curious about the way I think? And what we stumbled into was, oh, their culture, their country of origin, which is Africa, um, they debating is not, at least from her area, is not welcome. It's seen as really disrespectful. And I'm like, now I know why you don't like American activists so much, because that must seem really disrespectful to you. And then she pointed out that even some of the assumptions I was making about Western psychology, that empathy, mutual curiosity, and sort of intellectual humility are not universals. Then it stumped me because I'm like, well, then how the heck do you get along cross culturally? And that's what I was wrestling with in my piece. And I really love being silly and self deprecating. Um, but I'm actually making a post in response to a criticism that I got. I didn't like the way the guy criticized me, but I loved the content of it. And it's something that has been on my mind around what I would call mature pride in country. And I remember Liz Scarf did this amazing, she runs the Deep Democracy Institute in Australia. Yeah, she's in Melbourne. I remember she did this great post about sort of looking at your culture and the way your culture has been oppressive. And she said, you got to be careful that you don't just criticize your culture, that you also really value the things that are great about your culture. And this guy sort of criticized me. He said I was self-hating. And I'm like, that's not true about me. I know the part of me that used to be when I was younger. I felt really liberal and progressive in a way where all I could do is critique everything that was wrong with my culture and feel like I had to rebel against everything. And that's not where I'm at. So I wasn't super enamored of his approach, but I did like the topic. So could we talk a little bit about mature pride in country, what it looks like? Psychologically, why we all kind of suck at it, and um, what ends up happening as the end result if we don't develop the capacity to have mature pride in country. And I am going to be a creepy therapist because I am trained in psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, attachment based, and trauma models of therapy. So you got to know that that is my bias coming in. And I know it's a bias. It doesn't mean that everything that I have to say is valueless, but it does mean that it is a limited lens. So if you're interested in my limited lens, keep listening. Oh, and I will say, someone pointed out, oh, Tracy, you're too intellectual or you're too geeky. And a lot of white folks get criticized as using intellectualizing as a way to kind of gain power in a defense. And that is true. I also am a person too that uses intellectualizing because I came from a pretty abusive childhood that was very authoritarian and hyper religious. And the only place that I was still free was in my mind, where nobody knew. And so to out myself, to share with you that the reason why I think these bizarre, complex, deep thoughts is I probably am neurodivergent in some way. When I studied political science in undergrad, I would get together with other partners because they couldn't connect the dots between all the things that we were reading, but I could, because that's just the way my mind works. I'm not particularly book smart, but I'm super fast at going, but this and this and this and this and this. I really love hanging out with people that are smarter than me. And I really love learning from people smarter than me because then I'll go, oh, well, what about that? That's why I loved that guy's criticism because I was like, oh, but I love kind of what he's pointing at. You know what I mean? Like, so You'll have to give me grace that part of why I nerd out is because this is the way my brain happens to organize things. It also comes from my lens and my personal history, even though I've done 27 years of trauma work on myself. um, I'm going to be a messy human for my whole life. And actually, I do not want to use Western psychology to take people's messiness away. I want Western psychology, and I say this all the time, to make us freer, to be able to observe ourselves so that we're not reacting on autopilot, but have a little more choice. And I do have a little more choice, right? I'm choosing to now speak. When I was a kid, it wouldn't have been okay to sort of speak my mind, right? Okay. So, what do I mean by mature pride in country? Well, mature pride is being able to hold that we do crappy stuff and have done crappy stuff in the past and are able to look at it, take ownership of it, take responsibility for it, repair it where we can, grieve it where we can't, and keep moving forward in a collaborative way to try to reduce as much harm as possible. Self-responsibility perspective, right? Where we're stuck is I see that there is something going on where we have what is called blind pride. And I'm going to talk about what are the psychological defenses beneath both of these in a second. Blind pride, which is this grandiose, I'm better than everyone and our way is the best way. And I did in my article, to that man's point, pick on the US because that is kind of how the US has been perceived. Now, we're not the only culture that is perceived that way. We might be perceived that way more just because we have the mic a lot. You know, we have a big military, so we get a big mic for that. We have a lot of money, so we get a bigger mic for that. And we put out a lot of films and TV and produce a lot of tech to speak. So we have a big mic for that. Doesn't mean that there aren't other countries that have blind pride too. They just might not be as visible out in the public sphere because of those sort of power and rank factors. Here's what I think this man was trying to get at. There's also what's called blind criticism. I've got notes here. It's about criticizing and wanting to dismantle and sort of only seeing everything bad about your culture. And the danger of that is that it leads to this kind of feeling that, well, nothing matters then. If everything is bad about the place that I come from, then nothing matters, or got to tear it down and destroy it, right? Okay, so those are immature, blind pride and blind criticism. Where do they come from psychologically? Get out your notes or turn this off because you're going to be bored to tears if you're not interested in psychology. And I try to strip out as much of the psychobabble language as I can because I like psychology. I've been studying for a long, long time. I also recognize it's limited, but it doesn't mean it's, again, only to be criticized and worthless, right? Okay. Why do we resort to either blind pride or blind criticism about our countries? Let's talk about what happens psychologically to us that might lead us to doing this. The first thing I'm going to talk about is something called the splitting defense. It's the black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. We have almost like our brain and our nervous system cannot tolerate any ambiguity or anything gray. Well, where the heck does this come from? So it's creepy psychology stuff. When we're little kids, we just need a secure enough environment. We need reliable caregivers that are reliable enough, but we don't want them to become so reliable that we never experience hardship. We want that in between, but there's got to be enough predictability, enough food on the table. You've got to live in a safe enough neighborhood where what you're able to start to do as a human developmentally is to cultivate the capacity to hold the idea that, oh, love is imperfect. And I still believe in love. My parents love me and they piss me off sometimes. My community is mostly safe and my neighbor's dog got hit by a car, right? That you start to be able to, because you feel secure enough, hold the tension that care and love are imperfect. Okay. If you don't have enough security, you're living in a neighborhood that's really dangerous, or you have parents that either have their own challenges, so they scream and yell at you all the time, or oh, I also left this one out, or if they're morally inflexible. So if you come from a high control religion, you're also prone to this black and white thinking. So this black and white thinking does lead to blind pride or blind criticism. See what I'm saying? Okay. And then you go to therapy and you work on that, right? This is what, I mean, therapy is supposed to be helping us cultivate and develop past the places that we got stuck in our life so that we can be free, not so that we can behave and be pristine and proper. I'm not proper. I'm trying really hard not to curse because I like to curse. Okay. 2, another reason why we go into blind pride or blind criticism. We have a low self concept. I know it sounds weird. How could this possibly be connected? So, if we were parented in this way that says your worth is based on how well you perform, some might say our education system promotes this too, that your worth is based on how well you perform. Or we were told that our worth was only as much as we made our parents look good, right? Um, or we had relational trauma. Somebody beat the crap out of us, or we were criticized constantly, right? Or the culture did those things to us. So if we were somebody who was living in a racist society that was constantly saying, you're a criminal, you're lazy, all of that stuff is going to start to develop a low self concept. And you want to know what happens when you have a low self concept? The last thing that you want to do is revisit how painful that is. It's difficult. And that's a lot of the stuff you do in therapy is you go back and you feel incomplete experiences and finish them, grieve them, and leave them in the past, or at least start to relate to the parts of you that still carry that pain with a lot more awareness. So you don't have to keep acting it out. So you're free so that you are liberated from the pain. Got it? Okay. Thanks for listening to me. You're so wonderful. So that blind pride is this kind of grandiosity that we develop to protect our low self-worth. If I can be blindly prideful in my country, it's a defense against that low self-worth stuff. And if I can reject pride, I don't want to be identified at all with anything having to do with pride because I don't want to be identified with the very people that hurt me to begin with. Right? So you see how it's flip side of the same coin? It's still a defense against feeling, but one is I don't want to be anything like the person that harmed me or the society that harmed me. So I'm just going to reject and criticize my country of origin. Or I don't want to feel any of it. So I'm going to be grandiose and think that my country of origin is fabulous. You got it? Okay. 3rd reason. If we have authority issues, now they're linked to these other things. It's not like you just have one. But if we have authority issues from our childhood, like we had really absolutist parents that were so heavy handed, oftentimes we'll create loyalty to that kind of absolutism. We feel like that's what love means, is to stay loyal to what we learned from our parents. Or we'll go the opposite direction and say, screw you. I'm going to spend my whole life rebelling against what a jerk you were. But do you see how we're not free there? And that leads to blind pride, blind criticism. And when we have that, we're kind of caught in a perpetual either towing the line of our family or fighting against. Neither one of them are particularly free. Okay. And then the last is that we do start to develop a sense of group identity and group responsibility. And there is something that happens as you move into later stages of your development. You start to know what groups you belong to or don't belong to, right? And something happens when we begin to take a look at the groups that I belong to have caused harm. Okay. Based on any of that psychological stuff that I just talked about, we have a hard time feeling what I would call healthy guilt, healthy shame. I don't know very many countries that came about without harming some. I mean, there's been a lot of harm in human history, right? And then repairing that harm is a big project. It's part of how we move forward in a more self responsible and group responsible way. But if you have any of this psychological baggage that has you have a propensity towards blind pride or blind criticism, what will happen is you can't take what I call healthy group responsibility. And the reason why is because the shame is too much to bear. You have not learned affect tolerance, which is to tolerate feelings in your body, to tolerate the feeling of guilt, and how to take responsibility. Now, this is one of the things that I do really well because I was raised in a high control religion. I'm okay making mistakes and going, I screwed that up. And I think that's partly what this guy had a reaction to in my article is that I don't take myself so seriously. I screw stuff up all the time. It's partly why I can talk about these hard topics because if someone cancels me, I'm like, well, okay. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be canceled, but I'm, there's just an ease in the middle of that for me, I guess. I have a harder time when I have a fight with just one friend than what strangers on the internet think. Um, so the third thing I wanted to say is then what is the end result? What does this lead to? If we don't go work on this stuff, if we don't go work on our tendency to split the world into black and white, if we don't go work on our low self concept, if we don't go work on the authority issues that we have, either from the way our parents raised us or the ways in which we were abused and oppressed by the society we live in and our reactions to it, and if we don't go work on being a self responsible group member that can look at the crappy stuff the groups that we belong to do to other people, then we're going to do one of two things. We're going to do the blind pride or we're going to do the blind criticism. Okay. And blind pride might have us wanting to take over other countries or wanting to marginalize people that are a really, threatened group of people. They might need to be, anyway, I'll go through a list. So, number one, when you move into blind pride or blind criticism, you become really intellectually rigid. And you know what happens when you're intellectually rigid? You're not seeing things in a very creative way. So your ability to solve problems in the world is pretty limited because you're defending yourself. And when we're defending ourselves, we don't have access to all the parts of our brain that could be solving problems in a really creative way. Two, we will start organizing in groups around. So there's the blind pride group and there's the blind criticism group. And we'll just start organizing culturally around these psychological defenses. And that's going to lead to potentially more destruction. It actually valorizes these psychological defenses in an odd sort of way, right? Third is, and I think because I come from a high control religion, I get really about this one, even when I'm engaging in it and I track it when I am, is moral narcissism, where either group thinks they're better than the other group. I'm morally superior because I have blind pride in my country. I'm morally superior because I criticize all the sins of my country. That's a defense. It's still too narrow. You're reducing activism, patriotism, and real reform to performativism for your own personal brand or your own personal self-worth. You see what I'm saying? All right. The other is we get stuck in learned helplessness. Do you know this perpetual blind criticism is actually learned helplessness in drag? And let me explain to you how. When you don't actually know how to change a system or participate in contributing to good, the only choice you have is to criticize and criticize and dismantle and dismantle and criticize. Okay. When I can't read my notes here. Similarly, the alternative to learned helplessness is I call it learned idealization. For similar reasons, I don't believe I can have any sort of power on my own to make real meaningful change. So I'm just going to perpetuate this idealized stance. I idealize you. You're so wonderful. Oh, amazing, amazing. it's a way to sort of give up your power in a way to really make any meaningful change. Um, and here's the part where I'm really keen on all of this because I'm a couples therapist. That's my specialty. I'm interested in how two people relate. And oftentimes, this dynamic of blind pride, blind criticism, um, mirrors, oh, what is it called? I forget the name of it. When you have your partner where you valorize your partner or you de-idealize your partner, and we tend to get stuck in these roles where we either want to idealize everything about our partner or we want to criticize everything about our partner. It's the same dynamic. So, what's funny is this splitting defense, this low self concept, these unaddressed authority issues, and this inability to be a self responsible member of a group actually are directly correlated to our satisfaction in our romantic partnerships. I know that's a real leap, but you look at the defenses and they're very linked. That's why I'm interested in this stuff because I think about this with my couples all the time. So, what is mature pride and country? It is healing those rifts of splitting. It's healing that rift of low self-worth. It's healing those authority issues. Because when you do all that, and it's becoming a self-responsible group member, when you do all that, number one, your nervous system is not in a threat response all the time. You do not need to avoid difficult feelings because in therapy you've learned to face difficult feelings and or learn to be in community and ask for help when you are having difficult feelings rather than resorting to these defense mechanisms. And then you can be much more willing to go, well, here are the great things about my country, and here are the bad things about my country, and here's how I want to make change. And then you'll also be able to be in conversation that have with people that have different views about what are the great things and the bad things and how to make change without needing to move into these, you know, polarized groups. I'm tired of the word polarization. You probably are too. Okay, so I tried it. I just did my little sermon. I have a client that always tells me, you give sermons and you're good at it, so you should give more sermons. This was a heck of a lot more fun than trying to write this down. Um, so I hope that you got something out of this. It was 23 minutes of your time. So thank you so much for listening. And I hope that we can all develop mature pride in the countries that we live in. Because I think that as I travel the world more and more and meet people from other countries, God, it's so mind expansive and spiritually opening to have these diverse experiences from cultures all over the world. And yeah, so thank you to all my friends from other countries who teach me and I teach them how we can talk when we kind of come from different places. And they've taught me a lot of mature pride in my own country. All right. Hope you're having a good day. Ciao. There we go.